Okay, good morning. My computer is getting blurry here. I apologize for that. I may be getting access to a new computer, so here, this is better. Okay. So here it is, Thursday morning. Hurricane Delta is bearing down on us. Hopefully, for our sake, and unfortunately for others, moving a bit more west. So at this point, I think most of us, outside of Western Terrebonne and southern Western Terrebonne and Stream Lower Lafourche, St. Mary, anybody's from St. Martin and New Iberia, we're kind of out of the worst, although we'll probably still get effects. So hopefully you're prepared, and I've got to do a couple of things today just in case you're around the house in Baton Rouge. And because of the deteriorating weather later today, I've decided not to go into Nichols. So I'm here at home doing this. So, sorry. So what am I doing today? This is my replacement video about Fowlers orbitals and moving your story through the orbitals. There is a explanation of the orbitals in Moodle, and that's what I'll be using. I actually just made some edits. I'll be replacing that. So I will share my screen around that. So, okay. There we go. So this hopefully you can read along. So Leo Fowler's narrative process. The purpose of the process. Let me do something real quick. So the purpose of the process is to get researchers, and I consider all of you potential researchers. You're in a graduate program, you'll be doing some type of research or clinical as your capstone. And most of you, if you're doing research, will be doing quantitative research. Many of you work with numbers, not qualitative, where you work more directly with people. Well, what I like to say is that numbers, those numbers that you work with are numbers that actually represent people. Okay. And so in a sense, you can't just talk about the numbers, you have to tell the story of the numbers. And that may include anecdotes at times, or what you're seeing through your interpretations of those numbers and what it says about the students or the teachers, the communities that you are researching. So all research ultimately has a narrative component. Even in my dissertation, which is now a book, so my personal narrative component was in my introduction, leading to my look at historical evidence about curriculum. Okay. So And by going through, and so what Fowler was looking for was a way to, a sort of method, if you will, a process to go deeper, to look deeper into her own difficulties, and thereby helping us look deeper into our stories of difficulty. And by doing that, we make it possible to learn more about ourselves and thus about our teaching selves. You know, who am I, and my actions as a person impact who I am as a teacher. So to be a better teacher means to become a better person. So most of our stories, you know, end up, by their nature of difficulty, become very personal. Some sometimes are traumatic. And that would move us into a whole nother level. People do work on traumatic memory. And I think sometimes they are traumatic. I had a undergraduate who later became a graduate student. But his experiences in student teaching, I think, were somewhat traumatic. It really kept him, in part, kept him from actually working full time for about 3 years. I had another student teacher who, her experience was so traumatic. She was an older student, but she actually had a heart attack. So, you know, that's very rare. So it's, and I think when she recovered, I think she moved. I don't know if she ever became certified. I hope she did. She really, as a student teacher, she really wasn't doing poorly. She was doing well. So let's go through the process. So we begin with the naive story. All but a few of you have done that. If you have not sent me your naive story and you're viewing this video, then please do so as soon as you can. Okay. But it's important to think of the story as a kind of knot, and we have to unravel that knot. And this is basically analysis. So your first, in your next, or I should say, orbitals, you're going to be unraveling the knot. You're going to be engaged in a kind of analysis of your own story. So you're being asked, in a sense, to step away from that story and no longer be the person affected, but to be the person, to be the researcher analyzing the story. And that takes a bit of self-distancing through that process. Okay. So the second orbital is psychological reconstruction, or rather, as Fowler writes, re/construction. Here, Fowler is playing with our understanding of the word reconstruction. By splitting the word, she's reminding us that to reconstruct is not merely to repeat a memory. Okay. It is instead to construct a remembrance of a difficulty anew. So in a sense, you're creating a new memory by writing out the story, by reconstructing that story of difficulty, whether that difficulty was last week or 5 years ago. Okay. Um, as we begin this first analysis of our story, we've begun to unravel the affective, emotional, and the cognitive aspects of the difficult situation. So how the incident made us feel and how it made us think. And we have to analyze that. As Fowler states, how we feel is inextricably linked, my mouth is not working well this morning, is inextricably linked with the cognitive process of making sense of the difficult. How I think and understand the meaning of the experience. With this orbital, we begin to ask ourselves how and why we are feeling the way we're feeling. Why are we angry or frustrated at this student, etc., at this student, this parent, this colleague, supervisor, or whomever? Secondly, how do these emotions impact how we understand what occurred? Okay. So, would our understanding of the incident be the same as an outside observer, one who wasn't familiar with either person involved or the people involved? Okay. Here, Fowler, as she writes about in this chapter, is engaging in some psychoanalytic methodology. And the whole idea of this is to promote psychological healing around the incident, to help us become more confident as a teacher and a person. Okay. So we're self-analyzing ourselves, and in the first moment. Okay, why did I act the way I did? Why did I respond the way I responded to the incident? Why did I get angry, or why did I get defensive? Why did it impact my self-esteem as a person and a teacher, or a coach, or whatever our job might be? Okay, so you got to go through some self-analysis, and this may actually take a couple of attempts. You want to write out what you're thinking as you ask some of these questions of yourself, and then come back to it and do it again, and new things may emerge. Okay, and sometimes it activates new memory of the event. If it's been a while, I mean, you may need to think about what was going on that day outside of that moment. Okay, what stresses were you under? And we're under, as teachers, we're under a great deal of stress right now, particularly. So, particularly with a category due to hurricane heading in our general area. Psychotherapeutic ethics. This is Fowler's third orbital. She asked us to engage in issues of professional ethics and morality. So here, it's interestingly, this kind of links back to the moral life of schools. That's why that reading comes, part of the reason that reading comes first. This orbital asks us to confront our potential to do harm to those we teach or those who we work with. And this one would argue would be including ourselves, even when that harm is unintentional. And this clearly links back to one of the topics for the moral life of schools. Okay. Just as importantly, we ask ourselves how we may have brought harm to our own self. Okay, repeating myself. We can only begin to heal ourselves from the harm we have done by first recognizing the harm we may have done to others as well. And there's a word I left out here unintentionally, and I realized it as I was reading over this again. And that word is forgiveness. Okay. So I think this orbital, in part, when we recognize harm, is that we work to forgive the other, those others involved, and forgive ourselves. Because as teachers, our tendency, and many of you write about this, not everyone, but many write about your tendency towards perfectionism. Okay. And so you have to forgive yourself as well as the other. Okay. It is through this healing, right? We not only heal ourselves, but heal our teaching selves. We become better teachers. I would add that the greater the resistance we may feel to looking at the harm we may have done in our teaching, the greater the potential harm of our actions. Okay. So we really have to look at what was going on, even those difficulties where it appears to be cut and dry, right? It's understandable you would get upset. Okay. So it's not so much that you get upset, but what happens afterwards. Okay. Narrative craft is moving the knot to a container. So it's basically, how do we rewrite the story? So this goes back, once your naive story will be your opening, in a sense, opening paragraph. You're introducing the reader to your difficulty. But then as we move through the orbitals, beginning with orbital 2 and with orbital 3, how am I beginning to rewrite the story to have less edge, less anger, less frustration? Let all that frustration be apparent in the opening paragraph. Then we need to try to step back, okay? So, and try to experience your story reflectively by considering the evidence that you've laid out as objectively as possible. And again, this may take 2 or 3 attempts to get to a more objective moment. And so I can begin to further analyze my difficulty from an outsider's position. So that's the objective position. It also asks us to employ fictional practices. So what is that? Well, we'll get into that in a moment with orbital 5. But Fowler clearly sees looking at fictional practices. So let's look at orbital 5. Fowler's orbital, 5th orbital, is hermeneutic philosophy. Big word, new word for many of you. With this orbital, I work to uncover what may lie beneath my story, the meaning that may exist between the lines, so to speak. So we always are asked to interpret what's deeper about texts, right? This is part of what we learn to do in English class. This is really what we should be learning to do in history. What's deeper here? These are both history and literature. So both fiction and nonfiction can be open to interpretation, and ask us. These are aspects of what I would call, others have called indirect discourse, whereas the sciences, let's say, may be more direct, although you find some indirect discourse in that as well. Hermeneutics is the act of interpreting text, the uncovering of truth, not the uncovering necessarily of evidence, but the uncovering of truth. And I'm, despite my background in things like postmodern theory, I do believe that there is truth, unchangeable, always true truth, especially when the truth is observed by the story being told. I'm sorry, not observed, especially when the truth is obscured by the story being told. Okay, so there may be a deeper truth to your story that your emotional reaction, and the truth may be about you, that your emotional reaction may be hiding from you. And here we're trying to peel away some things. And as you read Fowler, if you look at her vignettes that come between the explanations of the orbitals, and in reading, I don't think those vignettes are there to set up examples of an orbital. I just think they're interludes of her going through stories. Okay, trying to uncover. I find trying to uncover the pain of her upbringing. Apparently, there's a lot of pain there, which is very interesting. Okay. I have to ask myself, why did I act? I have to ask myself, why did the others act as they did? Okay. I have to look, I'm jumping ahead of myself. I have to look for deeper meanings that may be hidden from the story. To accomplish this, I may need to view my difficult situation through multiple lenses, through multiple points of view. This is where the fictional aspects come in. I have to try to imagine, first for me, but also particularly for the others, right? Why did they act the way they did? Okay. What are the reasons? And I don't necessarily know that reason. Sometimes I do, but I don't necessarily know. So we have to imagine what some of those reasons are and write to each of those reasons. Because by learning these, from these motivations, by setting up these scenarios, I'm learning how to react better to situations involving these kind of difficulties in the future. And really, that's what this exercise is about. I don't think it's secondary to being a better researcher, a research writer. It is part of why we do this exercise. Because my hope for each of you is that you're better at what you're trying to do, teaching or otherwise. Okay, and that you find your ways to approach the other, student, player, coworker, supervisor, as if they have a soul. Okay, so this is how I've learned to become better, through these scenarios that I imagine. 6 is curriculum pedagogy. And basically this is simple. This asks, what does the narrative and all its newfound complexity? So we don't do this until we're pretty satisfied with our new narrative, right? So what is it teaching me about myself and my teaching practice? Okay. And 7 is making public and providing it to me is not making it public. We don't have this necessarily have this opportunity. Some of you might later, but particularly if you're in the elementary or secondary program. But this is what poetics of teaching, that final thing. We really don't get there. Anyway, so that is my explanation. I tried to, add some things to the narrative that's written out for you to kind of, model some of that, my own thinking. I do realize that I don't think I had hoped to work on my reconstruction this semester. That's not been possible. So hopefully that example is sufficient. I don't think my reconstruction is complete. So don't assume so. So I look forward to seeing everyone's drafts. A couple of y'all have sent me a draft. If you have, I would ask that if you view this video, hoping you do, that you will then maybe reconsider that draft, just in case. All right. Well, I wish everyone a safe few days from the hurricane. Anyone is evacuating, please be safe in the road. And let me know if you need anything from me in terms of the class. So y'all take care.